Manjeet Singh Desai to move the motion.
Thank you very much, Ms. Cummins. And I beg to move that this House has considered the matter of implementing the Taylor Review of modern working practices. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairship. Once again, I'm grateful to have secured this debate and welcome honourable members and right honourable members here today to discuss the Taylor Review and employment rights. The Taylor Review of Modern Working Practices was published on the 11th of July 2017, in fact just a month after my election to this House, a most auspicious day, almost 5 years ago. And what do government have to show for it, Madam Chair? You would think in this time workers' rights would be transformed, with Britain leading the way as the best place to work. Sadly, government progress on this issue over the past 5 years has been characteristically disappointing. Indeed, instead, we have seen the explosion of our gig economy without proper rights or protection, spread of the immoral fire and rehire practices, a strained work-life balance, certain rights not given from day one, and limited protections for the self-employed. Is this the record the Minister wants our country to be proud of? The scale of sexual harassment, Ms Cummins, experienced by some of our workforce is just shocking. 1 in 2 women and 7 in 10 LGBT plus workers have experienced sexual harassment at work. So it's hardly surprising we are back here today to discuss the lack of progress. Just 7 out of the 53 Taylor Review recommendations have been legislated on, even though the government accepted 51 out of the 53 recommendations. Also, we have as yet to see the promised but elusive employment bill. And the 4 subsequent consultations have not had individual responses. Even the initial reaction, Ms Cummins, to the Taylor Review at the time was lukewarm. The Trades Union Congress noted that it was not the game changer needed to end insecurity in work. And Unison called government's response to the review no good, saying, and I quote, "It won't work and it isn't a plan." Perhaps I was being too optimistic to expect government to act on this growing problem. Regardless, this is something I cannot help but fight for, because I see the real-life consequences of their abject failures. Yes, I will.
Mike Amesbury.
My honourable friend for securing such an important debate. He's making a brilliant speech. I've a number of workers, gas workers, airways workers, and indeed working in warehouse and distribution centres, who are suffering from fire and rehire. In fact, some of them have obviously gone through this process and those painful consequences for their families. Isn't it just another example of all rhetoric and no delivery?
Manjeet Singh Desai.
My honourable friend from Weaver Vale, and I also thank him for his leadership in his constituency on behalf of his constituents, many of whom suffered from the immoral fire and rehire practices. And let us not forget, when my honourable friend and other members of this House tried to have that immoral practice banned, the government were the ones that blocked that from actually happening. And indeed, in my own Slough constituency, I have been approached by private hire drivers, dismissed without reason, working parents unable to pay their bills, and companies underpaying their workers agreed wages. And this is despite the excellent and enduring work of trade unions, the GMB, Unison, Unite, CWU, RMT, TSSA, USDOR, ASLEF and others, fighting for the basic rights of their members to be upheld. I appreciate the modus operandi of this government has historically been to underdeliver for working people. But as Matthew Taylor himself noted, workers should be treated like human beings, not cogs in a machine. Work reflects the kind of society we want to live in, how we build our country's future, what our priorities are, the value we place on workers' mental health. In this constantly evolving world, we cannot accept the status quo. It's people's lives and livelihoods at stake. No doubt the Minister today will hail government successes on employment and cite the growing numbers in work, but what we must not lose sight of is the quality of these jobs. And that's paramount, Ms Cummins. It's the quality, not just the mere quantity. Millions in insecure and damaging work, is not a success. Even prior to the pandemic, 4 million workers were in poverty. Yes, that's 4 million workers working, nearly half of those were in full-time employment, but also in poverty. So I would appreciate it if the Minister could outline exactly how he plans to address some of these key issues already identified by the Taylor Review.
On that point.
Yes.
In Labour.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the intervention, and congratulations to my honourable friend for securing this really timely debate. But despite the Taylor Review spectacularly failing, because that's what it did, by the way, we held a lot of store by the government's suggestion that this would be the panacea for workers' rights, and it spectacularly failed. But does my honourable friend agree with me that the intentions and what the government have done since 2017 has shown a huge disrespect to the working people? We've still, as the honourable gentleman, my honourable friend mentioned, got 4 million people, working people in this country in poverty.
Manjeet Singh Desai.
I thank my honourable friend from Wainsbeck, and indeed he is right. What was considered by the government to be a panacea has not actually transpired. In fact, as I mentioned earlier, the unions, the Trade Union Congress and others were not as amenable to what was proposed. But despite all of that, as I mentioned, 51 out of the 53 recommendations were accepted by the government. So why have so few been legislated upon? Within the review, Ms Cummins, it's noted that, and I quote, "Government must take steps to ensure that flexibility does not benefit the employer at the unreasonable expense of the worker, and that flexibility is genuinely a mutually beneficial arrangement. Under current arrangements, employees often work sometimes double their contracted hours, yet can often be penalised for doing so, with reports of workers unable to get mortgages, asked to take holiday time for hours outside of their contract, or having to deal with vastly different weekly payslips. The Low Pay Commission recommended that government ensures employees have the right to switch to a contract that reflects their normal working hours. So what steps have the government, or are the government, taking following this? There should be a baseline level of security and predictability for workers, not flexibility which only benefits the employer. I would say, Ms Cummins, that the second issue that I would like to now raise is on sick pay. In the UK, we hold a grim record of having the lowest statutory sick pay in the whole of Europe. This government is yet to remove the lower earnings limit from statutory sick pay and is still not a basic employment right for all workers, as outlined in the Taylor Review. Yet you should not have to choose between health and financial hardship. So my question for the Minister is very straightforward. Why is this still the case, even after a devastating pandemic? And it is clear that over the last 2 years, that the coronavirus pandemic has disproportionately affected some key groups, especially the self-employed, many of whom fell through gaps of government support. I'll be interested to hear the Shadow Employment Rights Minister, my honourable friend, the member for Ellesmere Port and Neston, because I'm sure that the Labour Party would ensure the self-employed could withdraw their labour due to immediate health and safety risk, strengthen blacklisting protection, and enable a health and safety representative for these workers, ensuring that they have the same protections as the employed. So, does the Minister not share these ambitions? Does the government not want to empower workers' entrepreneurial and independent spirit to create their own work? Another group, Ms Cummins, that was acutely impacted were those threatened with fire and rehire, including constituents of mine from Slough who worked for the 1 in 10 companies that used this abhorrent practice during the pandemic. Thousands of loyal workers sidelined and at the mercy of inadequate working conditions and protections. We need transformational change, as my honourable friend, the member for Middlesbrough, outlined in his Green Paper on employment rights. Legally redefining the work relationship, ending the qualifying periods before certain rights are granted, tackling discriminatory working practices, and ensuring the safety and security of jobs.
On that point?
Yes, I will.
Thanks very
Ian
much.
Lavery.
Mr Cummins, I'd just like to refer to my register of interest being a fully paid up trade union member and a member of a number of trade unions. With regard to the intervention, my honourable friend mentions fire and rehire. Now listen, the government had a great opportunity only just before Christmas, only weeks ago, to support the private members' bill from our colleague from Brent on fire and rehire. The government refused to allow that bill to go forward. What does that say about the government's intentions for the rest of the Taylor review?
I thank my honourable friend from Wensberg, and what it actually shows us is the government is all talk and no action. On umpteen occasions, they have extolled the virtues of the government and what they would be doing, the party of workers. Well, they are actually acting against the interests of workers through their own actions. And like my honourable friend, I too am a member of trade unions, and I'm a proud trade unionist because it is through collective action that so much can be achieved. But those trade unions were promised on numerous occasions that the government would be helping them, that the government would be helping workers to get this practice of fire and rehire banned. And despite the bill introduced by our honourable friend, the member from Brent and Harrow, unfortunately, that did not actually transpire in reality. Ms Cummins, in conclusion, our ambition as a nation should be simple. Every working person in the UK should be able to have a job that is fulfilling, pays fairly, and provides adequate benefits. It's a straightforward ask, which would not only benefit millions of working people, but it is the right thing to do. So why isn't the government doing it? Thank you very much, Ms Cummins.